Okay, so we are live. Hello, everybody. We have here Drew from Bows and Arrows, as well as Andrew. Drew, you're in Victoria today?
Yep.
And Andrew, where are you?
Calgary.
Perfect. So we're doing a quick Q&A with Drew from Bows and Arrows. All to celebrate coffees produced by women.
Well, we started Bows and Arrows in 2011 in Victoria.
Great. So we'll maybe jump into some of our questions in line with the theme this week or this month. And maybe we'll start with talking about your sourcing methodologies and how that led you to some of the coffees that are produced by women.
As we've grown, as our volume has grown, I think our methodology has taken form, and it's really like regional based. I don't think it certainly doesn't apply across the board because, for example, I've never been to Africa. It's a longer trip. It's a different format. There's different politics involved, and I think that's a key thing to remember for anybody who's thinking about green coffee sourcing, is that generalizing, it doesn't really help. It doesn't help in any situation, and considering the vastly different politics and histories of each region, it's really hard to speak broadly. I think it's dangerous, and so we've learned that. Like out of the gate, I think in 2011 we were like, well, we source coffee, this and that, like we do this, and it sounds good and it's reassuring to ourselves. But now we have more time to really test those things, and in our travels, see if what things actually apply to what we're saying, and what we need to change about what we're saying to apply to what we've discovered.
Sounds like a learning process. And I think it's important that you've highlighted that, for example, each of the countries that we source coffee from have different political and economical issues, as well as getting the coffee out, dealing with coffee growers in each of the different countries has vastly different dynamics and challenges. So, Andrew?
I mean, yeah, that sounds like a lot of kind of what it says on your bags. Like, you don't want to sell romance. Believe in tangible relationships, things like that.
Yeah. There's the green coffee sort of philosophy about how it's maybe romanticized a bit at the cafe level or at retail level, and then you get into it, and depending on what you want to do with your volume, you learn quite quickly that it's not what you thought it was going to be, and as you start to form relationships with people, and you start to, your company is simultaneously growing from maybe a 5-bag purchase, which you probably don't need to travel for, to a 100-bag or full container or more. Then it just changes. It changes everything. So in a conversation a couple of years ago I had with Chrissy Durchet from Different Coffee in Montreal. She'd just been at Symposium in Seattle at the SCA conference. And she sat in on basically some one-on-one on sourcing based models that were purchasing directly from women-owned or managed farms. Not necessarily all in coffee, but a lot of the sort of truisms or what they discovered applies across different products, agricultural products. And just where money goes when it's invested in I'm generalizing here, like female-run farms. So if it's owned and the money is going straight to women, I think the percentages of money staying within the community are far higher. These things are tested. I'm not going to just quote a bunch of like studies, but it's like Google it, you'll find it. So that made me think of like, okay, we're now at a scale, and I now have the time to really trouble the way we've been buying coffee, and then set out a course for how we want to buy coffee going forward, and where our money goes, and what we can do with intention.
Yeah. Have you been able to have like tangible experience with that, like buying from female producers and seeing kind of positive?
Coffee buying is one of those long view things, right? To suggest that we see tangible change over a season is a bit I don't know, optimistic. But you know, we're willing to suspend like that necessity or the necessity of observable change in such a short time. And it's like, well, we believe in it. The studies are kind of there. It sounds reasonable. All you can do is kick it down the street a little bit and see if that plays out over time as as planned. So
cool.
you know, we're talking about even like feedback on coffees. It's like that doesn't circle in, like, you know, we're giving feedback on coffees that were harvested several months before we're tasting them, and the next crop is already flowered. So
exactly.
Any changes to the coffee that is based around your feedback or the growing of it or the where the money goes and stuff like that is not readily seen maybe for 2 crops. So the time frame is not suitable to the sort of shortened attention spans of maybe the Western buying countries or retailing countries. It certainly is something that you have to commit to and see where it goes.
I guess it's interesting. It's almost like the roaster becomes the consumer in that sense, right? Like you kind of just buy with what's good or with what will make you look good, maybe. But
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of trends in coffee right now are built around the end model, not necessarily the supply chain. We have control over representation of the majority of people in the coffee industry, and that's been romanticized to the point where like we're all the chain of people and in their hard work and all the cliches that go into that, and it's, you know, comes from a good place perhaps, but we also have control over a vast amount of the representation of producers, of laborers that don't get spoken about, of men and women and families. So, you know, like one example that we talk about all the time is like we tend to zero in on the male farmer, ignore women's labor within the functioning at the farm level, and not just the labor that goes into picking, which is seldom talked about, but the actual like running of a farm. And then we name a coffee because it's fashionable to name it after the farmer, and it's almost always the man who potentially owns property, but not necessarily, and she's erased. So.
And do you think that's going to change as far as using female faces for the marketing aspect of it, as in like some people might choose to put the female name on the bag in future as this trend changes, but the reality of where the money's going, does that matter, do you think? Or
well, I mean, I think there's a danger to fetishize female producers in this situation where we start putting their names on the bag and we don't know anything about. Well, for one, people will just apply a generic model to buying coffee where it's just like, well, we've got a women's name on it now. I don't think it's necessarily an improvement. I think it's also tricky to know where money goes anyways. So this is like the tangibility of or the tangibility of your relationship and the status of it comes into play. So we often talk about relationship coffees. It's a bit of a buzzword, as we said, but you know, several people don't know the names of the kids of the people they're buying coffee from. So it's like, what kind of relationship do we really have? And so, I mean, these are questions I don't need to answer for other people. These are questions that are important to me. I need to answer them for myself, for my company, for our model, and then share them carefully and when necessary.
so can you tell us a little bit about what you have in your lineup that is currently produced by women, or and how maybe you came across these coffees?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is sort of a new initiative for us where it's more intentional going forward. So I think 4 of the coffees we're featuring on our menu this winter into early spring are from Colombia. They are all relationship coffees that are introduced to us through Shared Source importers. Shared Source is the sort of sourcing arm for small batch roasters in Australia. And we've been working with them for mostly Colombian, but also importantly Guatemala, Huehue, and Matacaspinla, and then some Kenyan and Ethiopian purchasing. Their model was attractive to us, and so essentially these are just introductions. They're producers that I haven't traveled to meet or buy specifically from, but we've made the intention known that we would like the opportunity to buy from for next harvest, and therefore we'll meet them in time. You tend to do a lot of this in coffee where you get an introduction, then retroactively you make, actually meet the people. You mentioned earlier about how we source, and do we buy like specifically from women, like by design, or is it cup score and they happen to be women? In this case, it was, we specifically requested, not just from Shared Source, but from any importers, or when we're traveling, we would like to see women's coffees on the table, because that's part of our emerging model. But, cup score plays into it, but sometimes it's fairly arbitrary. If I've got 286s and one's from a woman, I'll most likely lean towards it. But again, you need to find out more. There's that danger too of just sort of conflating all status equal. Like you might have some rich female producers in Nariño that, they're still women, but I don't know if my money necessarily needs to go there. Not to say that we just buy from poor people, but to say that we're just like, where's our volume most well applied?
Right. So looking more at like, is it more impactful in one area over another?
Yeah, which again takes a long time to assess, and I can't I can't say that I have my finger on the pulse of what happens in Nariño and Tolima like I might in Manila or Huehue. So,
and I think that, the intention is there, and that's where it starts, right? So.
Yeah. And there's the opportunity to correct. I think that's a huge thing in coffee, is just like, well, we've been buying from this person forever. I remember a few years ago, it's just like, well, actually, this guy's kind of a jerk. So why don't we just direct our volume somewhere else? And so the longevity of a relationship has been sort of, championed, but it's not necessarily a great relationship. It's how we want to represent ourselves. So.
Cool. So we're getting pretty close to the time frame of what I think we wanted to keep to. Andrew, are there a couple of other questions or one question that you would like to wrap up with?
Yeah. I guess we wanted to interview you to be able to speak for your own reasons why you chose to feature these coffees. And something I and others in Coffee Potluck have appreciated you is your self-critiquing of your industry and your own role in that. And to me, it just shows like a new level of transparency. It's not just like we're paying this amount for coffee, but it's how you're buying. And I guess with that, what do you still like about coffee? Like, what hope do you see for the industry that we find ourselves in? Or
I love coffee. Like, I love drinking good coffee. And I really like it. I find that when there's a coffee that I've sourced and I know the people and I've seen the farm and I know their family dynamic and we're essentially emerging, like we're becoming friends, it's far more exciting to like dig into that coffee when it lands and take home and brew for my family and think about, and just because I'm like, I know that like what the conditions are of that farm and I know what needs to be improved still. I'm thinking of a specific coffee. I don't have that image in my head for Kenya or most Ethiopian pooled coffees, multiple producer lots, unless I've met most of the producers and built the lots. So that's to me where my energy is. I really like traveling, making the connections is cliche, but making the connections in a way with strategy of going forward.
That's more meaningful, to you. And
that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. It's really valuable to hear your perspective. And by no means would I say that, this one conversation or one roaster is representative of all things that are happening in the industry, but it's a small spotlight of what's happening in this area of coffee. And I'm sure there's lots of other great things happening, but exciting to hear that is on your mind and that is your intention for Bows and Arrows going forward. Thank you so much for chatting with us and supporting Coffee Potluck.
Look, and I didn't even plan it. Look, I wore. I just put it on today.
For those who can't see it, that is a Bows and Arrows shirt.
Cool.
I will be accepting Bows and Arrows swag anytime now. No, just kidding. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you. Enjoy the coffees.